صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء. وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We continue this evening in our review of the supplication taught to us through our 12th Imam. And as we reach the 9th night of this month of Muharram, as we've been going through this supplication, we've been going over responsibilities, qualities, characteristics that as individuals that we need to imbibe within ourselves. And over the last few nights, we've been focusing not on the individual, but on the society, on the community that we live in. And we were looking at aspects of the Muslim society that our 12th Imam expects us to be working within, to resolve, to rectify some of the challenges and problems that we see. When we look at the topic for tonight, we see that the 12th Imam is addressing half of our Muslim community, half of humanity in essence. Tonight in the discussion, we want to look at what the 12th Imam has to say to the women of our society, the mothers, the sisters, the daughters, the aunts of our community. Obviously, there's a lot that can be said about women within the framework and the ethos of Islamic teachings. And obviously, even when we look at the world that we live in today, there are a lot of things that have been said and continue to be said about the role of women within society. I don't expect that we will be able to cover all of the areas tonight. Obviously, there are too many points to review and discuss. And so I'm going to look at just one or two aspects of how the 12th Imam expects the women to be. And this doesn't mean that, he's singling them out for any other reason other than the fact that we realize that within any society, we tend to see that women play a very prominent role. Women are often misused in society. Women are unfortunately the ones who are, abused at the hands of so-called men within our society. They are exploited. They are treated in a way which is not becoming of what Allah expects of men to treat the women like. And so tonight, as we go through this line of the dua of our 12th Imam, we remind ourselves that the role of women within Islamic society, especially within the society of the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, that the women have a very unique role to play within the workings. And as we mentioned before, that these qualities that we are speaking about, they are traits which all of us need to imbibe within our lives. They are characteristics that we all must infuse within our lives. And it's not just for the men. Sometimes again the women wonder, what role do they have within an Islamic society? Are women expected just to get married, stay pregnant all the time, deliver kids to society and sit at home and do nothing? Of course not. Because if we want to have a vibrant Shia community, a vibrant Muslim community, we need to realize that women have a role to play within our society, within our community, obviously within the ethos, the framework of Islamic teachings. And as I've said it in the past, I'll say it again, that even when the 12th Imam's Advent takes place, we know that there's that famous number of 313, 313. It happened at Badr, And at the time of the Imam's return, 313 individuals will be called to help the Imam. And that's just the first group. Under them will be multiple militias or organizations or groups that will be working with the Imam. But out of the 313, the hadith tells us that 50 of those are women. So if 50 out of 313 are women, that shows us that they have a direct role to play in the revolution of our 12th Imam. Tonight, in the line of the dua that I want to go over, we see that the 12th Imam says the following. He says, وَعَلَى النِّسَاءِ بِالْحَيَاءِ وَالْإِفَّةِ. He's asking for the women. He's asking for the women of our society, the Muslim women, the lovers of Ahlul Bayt alayhi wassalam, to possess two unique qualities, haya and iffa. Now these are traits which, if you want to translate into English, can roughly be translated as modesty and chastity. But it really doesn't do justice to the meaning and the depth of the words. And obviously we don't really have a lot of time to go into the depth of the meanings of these. Obviously these lectures, coming to majalis, coming to programs, are just ways for us to pique our curiosity, and then it's up to us to go at home and do our own research, our own study, our own investigation, to further understand such concepts within Islam. But just to give us a nutshell of what haya and iffat mean. They say that haya refers to this inner trait where we control our nafs to watch over ourselves. So haya is sort of like what they sometimes translate as bashfulness or shyness. But it basically is a spiritual trait where you control your desires, you control your passions, you respect yourself. Right? So maybe if I want to put it in a nutshell, haya means having self-respect. Respecting yourself as a human being. Not, for example, as we see in our societies today, where people don't have the self-respect, or they think what they have is self-respect, where they go out dressed as they want to dress, sometimes with as little clothing on as possible, and then they want people to respect them. So haya is this inner trait of self-respect. And iffa, they say, is a trait which we touched upon a bit last night in the concept of the salat and in discussing prayers. And iffa is where we don't allow our shahawat, our passions, to get the best of us. You know, as you'll recall from last night, we talked about this phenomenon amongst the youth especially. The dichotomy between the rational brain and the emotional. The aspect how sometimes the rational thinking is clouded over by our emotions. And we talked about the fact that the salat, the prayers, the 5 daily prayers, should control our passions and desires. But when we leave the salat, when we waste the prayers, we end up being victim to our own desires, our own passions, the shahawat. So iffa is a trait where we don't let the shahawat get control over us. And as I mentioned even last night, I'll reiterate this fact, that to control the desires which Allah has put within each and every one of us is not easy to do. It's not just the fact that I can become religious, be mutadayyin, follow the religion, and now I am protected by Allah. That is one aspect of being religious and not performing sins, is to be on the path of the religion. But as I mentioned last night, that it's also important to fulfill our desires that Allah has put within us in the applicable and the permissible ways. And we see in society, when the non-Muslim society around us or our own Muslim communities, when we as a community begin to put barriers on the youth, when we prevent them from doing things which are permissible, when we make marriage difficult, when we make it difficult to lead and to follow our God-given requirements of life, that is where we have problems and we begin to drift towards our shahawat, towards our passions, upon our desires. And so tonight when we look at this topic of the 12th Imam and women and what He expects of the women, we have to keep in mind also that what I'm going to talk about tonight relates as much to the men of the community as well as the women. Because I can't sit here and say for the women to be chaste, the women to be modest, the women to dress appropriately, and then I give the men carte blanche, approval to do whatever they want. Of course not. Islam did not come to discriminate amongst the genders like this. Yes, there are differences which I will try to highlight tonight. Men and women have unique roles within Islam. Men and women have unique hijab to wear. Men and women have different roles to play within society. But generally speaking, when Allah speaks about modesty, chastity, humility, these are qualities, characteristics that men and women have to abide by within the religion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Really, the only way that we can begin to understand the status that Islam gave to women 1400 years ago is to understand what was happening pre-Islam. Not only in Arabia, that obviously is the main area to review, but amongst humanity on a whole. And obviously we don't have time to go into the entire history of humanity. But when you look at least the time of the Jahli Arabs, the Arab community at the time of Rasulullah, before Quran is being revealed, women for the most part were commodities within society. Just like you and I today go and buy things in the market. We go and buy fruits and vegetables. We go and buy cars and gadgets. At the time of the Prophet, to an extent, women were like that, a commodity. They were bought and sold and traded on the open market. We know that the Quran tells us that there were certain tribes amongst the prophets that would bury their daughters alive. Not all of them, obviously, because if they were all killed, you wouldn't be able to continue humanity. But certain tribes would bury their daughters alive, and it stemmed from an event that took place in an earlier battle. And I don't want to go into the details, you can refer to the commentary of those verses, but there were individuals who, out of that fear that their daughters would show disgrace to the family name and honor, they ended up burying their daughters alive. And Allah talks about this at least twice in the Quran. So the time of the Prophet, before the Prophet comes with this religion of Islam, women are not given status within society. What happens is within a very short period of time, the message of Islam begins, the Quran begins to be revealed to Rasulullah, and basically what ends up happening is that all of those preconceived notions that the Arabs of pre-Islamic time had about women become wiped out. And so basically they start at a clean slate. And one of the verses which we see this equality of men and women is in Surah Al-Hujurat, chapter number 49. It's a very beautiful chapter for those who want to know the Islamic system of akhlaq, of morality. Refer to Surah Al-Hujurat. And there are multiple commentaries available in English where you can better understand the content of this surah. But just one verse which shows us how Allah put men and women on a level playing field, where He says, addressing all of humanity, that we have, O humanity, He says, we have created you from a male and a female. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. We have created you from a male and a female and spread you into different tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another. Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. Indeed, the most noble of you in the sight of Allah is not the one who has the most money, not the one who is of the male gender. It's not any of these incidental characteristics, our skin color, our language, our nationality. It's all about taqwa of Allah, our knowledge, our awareness of Allah. And really, when you look at this verse, this is what wiped the slate blank. Men and women were given equal status, and then from there Allah began to build on the status of the man and the woman. When it came to issues of spirituality, men pray salat, women pray. Nobody can say that a man's prayer is worth more than a woman, or a woman's worth more than a man. Fasting of Ramadan was made obligatory. Nobody can say that a man fasts and their reward is more than a woman. But one of the questions that I want to just give a very brief answer to is people say, well, women can't pray every time in the month. There are certain times when they can't pray. It's haram for them. Month of Ramadan comes, there are certain times where a woman is not allowed to make the fasting. Doesn't that mean that men are superior? Because we get to pray all year round. We get to fast anytime that we want to. We have no barriers, so to speak. But one of the things that our sisters have to appreciate, and all of us, the men included, is that it's not about looking at praying or fasting as worship. What we have to appreciate is the fact that following the rule of Allah is worship. Obedience to Allah is ibadah. So sometimes Allah tells a woman, you cannot fast, you cannot pray. That doesn't mean they're not getting reward. No, by them following the rule of Allah and not praying or not fasting is worship. That is actually worship. To do nothing for the woman in that day, those days, is actually ibadat of Allah. So the women have to appreciate that they can soar to heights of spirituality. You know, in fact, I'll give you one prime example. As I mentioned a few nights ago, unfortunately, we don't have many female scholars within our community. As I said, you look at any city in the world, you look at the Muharram majalis, the lectures, and they're all men scholars, or 99% are men who are scholars who are lecturing. And we don't have many, maybe one or two women in every city who have gotten religious knowledge. That in itself is a problem that we have to tackle, we have to address. But you know, and I'm sure you've all heard the name of Allama Tabatabai, the author of Al-Mizan, as well as many, many other books. A scholar in many fields of Islamic studies. They have stories about him that he himself narrates, that when he was writing Al-Mizan, this magnum opus, 20 volumes in Arabic, which is now also being translated into English, and it's in multiple other languages. But they say that, and he says that when he would sometimes be writing Al-Mizan, and he was in Qom, and he came across some problem, he couldn't understand certain concepts, he actually went to a scholar in Isfahan who was a woman. She was a mujtahida, a female mujtahid. And she was a scholar. She herself has written a multi-volume Irfani commentary of the Quran, 18 or 20 volumes that she wrote, in addition to her commentary of Ziyarat Ashura and many other books. But the point is that he, as a man, as a mujtahid, as a scholar, as a faqih, as a mufassir, he went to a woman scholar and got her advice on ayat of the Quran. And so when you read Al-Mizan, you may be reading words that were influenced by this woman. So we see that women have played a role in Islamic theology. Women have been scholars. You know, unfortunately, again, as I say, we lament on the fact that we don't see this today as defined, as pronounced. And we have to rectify that problem. We have a lot of problems in our community. And this is one of them that we have to come to a solution to ensure that our sisters, who are not making too much noise upstairs, hopefully, will listen and try to make it forth to study religious studies, wherever it may be. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So when Islam came and wiped the slate clean and said, men and women, you're equal. Spiritually, you can ascend to Allah. You can become scholars. Some of our maraja allow women to become maraja taqleed as well. It's a very rare phenomenon, but some scholars have this opinion. But even if they can't become maraja, they can become at the top levels of ijtihad within the Muslim society. We end up seeing that in the 21st century, in this so-called era of enlightenment, where we've reached the stars and the planets and we've traversed into outer space, for some reason humanity has gone back into an era of jahiliyyah. You know, Allah talks to the wives of Rasulullah in Surah Al-Ahzab, and He tells them that do not go to the jahiliyyat al-ula, the earlier stages of jahiliyyah. this era of decadence, of lack of awareness of Allah. So there's an understanding that if there was an initial era of Jahiliyyah, that there can be a latter stage of Jahiliyyah. And maybe today, the day that we're living in today in the Western world, which is what they call an era of enlightenment, where women have so-called liberated, and they have women's liberation movements and feminism, and all of these fancy titles, maybe under the guise of all of this, because of the fact that they have been suppressed for so many years, that it has rebounded the other way, where they now are looking for acceptance in a society not based on women and who they are. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Maybe women have gotten to a stage where they have now tried to bring themselves to a level where they find that they can only be equal in society if they are equal to men in what men can do. And we realize that from a physical perspective, women are not built like men. Men and women have unique physical features, unique emotional, spiritual characteristics. And for Muslims especially to feel that, well, we have to be equal to the men. We have to be on an equal playing field in terms of politics, in terms of community administration, in terms of all of these things, we would be deluding ourselves and probably succumbing to this new era of Jahiliyyah. So coming back to the line of the dua, and I want to just look at these two traits of haya and iffa. How do these relate in a practical application into the lives of not only the women, although I want to address them specifically because the 12th Imam has directly mentioned them in this supplication, but all of us, that how do these traits of modesty and bashfulness, modesty and humility, modesty and having respect for ourselves, for our body, how do they translate into real world practical action? Three things I want to look at tonight. The first one is in terms of speaking, our verbal and also non-verbal communication. As we know that today in our contemporary era, we as human beings probably engage in more non-verbal discourse, more non-verbal communication than verbal. Most of us are more on our smartphones, texting, tweeting, all of this, more than verbally communicating with one another. Except if you're upstairs and there's more verbal communication up there. But more often people are doing non-verbal communication. And Allah speaks about this in the Quran. Yes, Allah is addressing the wives of Rasulullah. But we have to realize that wives of the Prophet, they have a unique responsibility. But we can also learn from the good ones amongst the wives of Rasulullah. And so how does Allah speak to the wives of Rasul? He says in chapter number 33, Surah Al-Ahzab, verse number 32, Ya Nisa al-Nabi, O wives, O women of the Prophet. He says, لَسْتُنَّ كَأَحَدٍ مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ, that you, the wives of the Prophet, are not like other women. And this is there's a lot of points we can bring up from this verse. I don't want to go into the semantics and the discourse and the debates about the wives, the wives of Rasulullah. But just to keep it very simple, he says that you, the wives of the Prophet, are not like other women. You're different. Because you're married to a prophet. You are expected to be of the most impeccable of characters. He says after that, لَسْتُنَّ كَأَحَدٍ مِّنَ النِّسَاءِ إِنِ اتَّقَيْتُنَّ فَلَا تَخْدَعْنَا بِالْقَوْلِ فَيَطْمَعَ الَّذِي فِي قَلْبِهِ مَرَضٌ وَقُلْنَا قَوْلًا مَعْرُوفًا. That if you have that taqwa of Allah, you have that consciousness of Allah, then be careful in your speech. Be careful that you do not say things, speak in a certain way, in a fashion where you would incite men who have, as Allah says, a marad, a sickness in their hearts. Allah talks about this in Surah Baqarah. فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. Sisters have to realize that not all men want the best for them. Men are predatory. Many times men will say things to get a girl. Many times guys will say things because they want to hook up and have you as a girlfriend. And that's why Allah says, talking to the women, don't speak in a certain way. Be assertive, don't be flirtatious. Be very careful how you speak to men, because you don't know what is in the heart of that man. He might come to you very respectfully. He might come to you in a very caring fashion. But you don't know what's in the heart. Allah says there's a marad, a sickness in that man's heart. And so speak in a very clear way. Don't give mixed signals. I would say that not only is this in relation to verbal discourse, but also on social media, our sisters need to be careful who they add as friends on Facebook, whose pictures they're liking on Instagram, who they're Snapchatting. These are all areas where we're all involved in today on social media. And the Quran, coming 14 centuries ago, it didn't speak about social media because it didn't exist at that time. But the lessons of the Quran are universal. They can be extrapolated to be put into contemporary examples and situations that we live in. So women have to be careful in their speech. Men also have to be careful. Men have to be careful that they don't give off the wrong signal, that they are trying to, use their power, their authority, their money, whatever they have, to entice women. So it goes both ways, as I said. Men and women are both responsible for their conduct, for their haya, and for their chastity. Number 2 is from Surah Qasas, verse number 25. And it talks about the 2 daughters of Nabi Shu'aib. 2 daughters of a prophet who are introduced to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And the story is long. If you've read it in the Quran, you'll know what happened at the time. But just the one verse that Allah speaks about these 2 daughters, or one of the daughters. And what ended up happening is that they had come to a watering hole. Their father was old. He wasn't able to come and take care of his flock of animals. So the daughters come, and they see that many men are there feeding the animals. And because they had humbleness, they didn't want to mix with the men, they didn't want to have a gathering with the men, they waited on the sidelines. And then Nabi Musa sees them and he says, I'll help you out. And as the story goes, he helps them. They go back home. They tell their father, Prophet Shu'aib, that this is what happened. And then one of them goes back, or they go back to meet Nabi Musa. They meet Prophet Moses, peace be upon him. And the verse says that one of these women came. فَجَاءَتْهُ إِحْدَاهُمَا تَمْشِي عَلَى إِسْتِحْيَاءٍ. One of them came walking, going to see Nabi Musa in a state of istihya. Now, this word in itself has been a matter of debate amongst the commentators. What does it mean that she came walking istihya'in? Is it just the way she physically walked? Commentators mention that it could encompass many different aspects. And they say because Allah did not mention the alif lam before istihya, He made it general. It's not a specific form of walking. Because we don't know, we don't have a video camera to see how they walked. But what we know is that their entire character was unique. The way they walked was unique. The clothing that she was wearing was something unique. Her attitude, the way that she spoke to Prophet Musa, was not how men and women would normally talk to one another. And so Nabi Musa recognizes all of these qualities within this woman, and that she is a woman of character, of respect, that she is respecting herself and her body, and so he is giving her also reciprocating with respect. In fact, they tell us in the tafsir that when the daughter of Shu'aib tells Nabi Musa, come to the house, my father wants to meet you, my father is inviting you. It's not even that we're inviting you. She doesn't say, if you look at the verse, you'll see, she's not saying that we're inviting you to come over. She says, my father is inviting you. That's one indicator. But we're told that while they were walking down the road, initially she was in the front, Nabi Musa, because she's leading him to the house. And Nabi Musa is walking behind her. The Nabi Musa makes a statement. Prophet Moses says that we, the prophets, we don't look at the backs of women. We don't want to walk behind them and see their figure, their shape. So he says, you walk in behind me, I'll walk in front. And don't even speak when you want to tell me whether we turn right or we turn left. Take a pebble, take a rock, and throw it in the direction that you want me to go, and I'll turn that direction. Now, I'm not saying tonight that our sisters don't speak to men, that they remain silent, that they put themselves, in a burqa and hide their presence. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that when we have times where there is gatherings and there is a possibility of sin happening, weddings, celebrations, programs where women dress up, that we need to maintain a separation of the genders. Women have to realize that men, again, are not all sincere in their intentions. And they have to be careful how they interact with the men of not only the non-Muslims, but even very much the men within the community. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Again, this goes for online as well as offline. What you say to a man on social media is as important as what you say in public or in private with that individual. And last but not least, and we'll come to a conclusion tonight, is the physical connection, the face-to-face connection of men and women. And here let me say that when you look at Surah An-Nur, chapter 24 of the Quran, when Allah talks about the hijab, and He talks about hijab in a few ayat of the Quran, hijab meaning the head covering that women wear, the modest clothing, Allah He doesn't specify specifics. Allah does not directly talk about exactly everything that has to be done within our religion. Because sometimes women and men ask that you talk about hijab, you talk about modest dress. What does Allah say about this in the Quran? Are there verses that clearly lay out the actual style of what a woman has to wear? Are there verses that tell the men what you have to wear? And generally speaking, yes, there are. But at another level, the ayat of the Quran are not very specific on a lot of areas. A lot of things in religion are not spelled out in the Quran. Yes, the Quran is, as Allah says, تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah explains everything within the Quran, but Allah left much of Islam to be taught by the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt. I'll give you a few examples because people ask, where is this in the Quran? Many times the youth will ask me, show me one verse of the Quran about whatever topic and I'll follow it. And sometimes there is no verse of the Quran. I'll give you one example. When a Muslim dies, when a believer passes away, what do? We bury them, right? We give them the ghusl with the pure water, with camphor, with the sidr, with the leaves. We wash the body 3 times, isn't it? We wrap the body in white cloth, in the kafan. We all do that, whether you live in Australia or Canada or Timbuktu or Iraq. We all do the ghusl and the kafan of the body in the exact same way. When it comes to burial, we don't face, we don't face the ocean. We face Mecca when we bury the body. But this procedure of burial is nowhere in the Quran. Allah doesn't tell us anywhere in the Quran to give the ghusl, to give the kafan, to bury facing Mecca. Why do we do it? Why not just cremate the Muslims like the Buddhists do? Why not just cremate the body, throw the ashes into the river, and be done with it? I don't know about Australia, but in Canada, it costs up to $15,000 to bury a human being. $15,000 to bury one person. That's a lot of money. That's like rent maybe for 3 months, for 6 months for rent. You pay to bury somebody. Why not just burn the body and throw the ashes in the wind? It's not in the Quran, so what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that Rasulullah told us that this is what you do when a Muslim dies. It's not in the Quran, but you know what? We as Muslims, we don't subscribe to that theory that Hasbuna Kitab Allah. We don't believe the book of Allah is sufficient. You know, that man who said that at the time when Rasulullah was dying, that the book of Allah is enough, we don't believe that. Because you need the sunnah of Rasul and Ali Rasul to follow religion. Otherwise, we're lost. Sisters will say about hijab, how do I understand hijab? If you look at all of the manaj al-taqleed, or a majority of them, they say to the women that your entire body, the shape of the body especially, needs to be covered from non-mahrams, people who you are related, who you're not related to. The only exception is the face, and the hands can remain open. And even that, the hands up to the wrist can remain open. And the face, the only part of the face that can stay open is what is washed in wudu. So the ears are not washed in wudu. So sisters can't tie their hijab back behind their ears and show their earrings, as some sisters do. When you do wudu, you wash your arms. The arms have to be covered in hijab. The neck has to be covered in hijab. The forehead has to be covered in hijab. It's not in the Quran. Don't ask me where the verse is, because it's not there. But again, we also relate Islam back to the family of the Prophet. And so when Allah brings the discussion about hijab, interestingly enough, Allah doesn't start with the women. Go to Surah Al-Nur, chapter 24, and look at the verse. Allah says, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah tells you and I, the men, say to the believing men, to lower their gaze, not to stare at the women, not to look at women in an impermissible fashion. Before the hijab for the women is the hijab of the men. And when we men don't fulfill our responsibility, when we're out there gawking and looking and staring at women, guess what? We are the ones to blame. We are the ones who share in a big portion of the blame of the problems of society, because we can't control our hormones. We can't control our inclinations and desires. So Allah says, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Tell the believing men to lower their gaze and guard their modesty. And once Allah is finished with us, the men, and He tells us what we should be doing, then He says, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنَاتِ. Now tell the believing women that they should also not look at men in an impermissible fashion, that they should protect their private parts, they should cover their body. And then Allah tells us what men, that a woman is allowed to enter into her private space where she doesn't have to wear the hijab, because there are times where the woman can't remove her hijab in front of her husband, her father, her brother, her uncle, those close family members. So Allah tells us that that level is where a woman can have interaction with people that she is related to, because there is no ulterior motive. The father is the father, the brother is her brother. They won't have those kinds of thoughts in their heads for a woman. And so Allah shows us that this concept of iffa, of haya, of chastity, of modesty, is not just about the clothing. It's about the attitude that a woman has. It's the way that she carries herself, the way that she walks in the street, the way that she speaks to men, the way that she has face-to-face contact at school, at work. Now, I don't say, and I'll end with this, I'm not saying that women should shut themselves out of society. No, they have to go to work. You go to work, you work with men, you have projects, maybe you have conferences, meetings with men. But our interaction is always at a professional level. We should never let our work relationship get too intimate, too personal. At school as well, youth ask me, well, I'm in university, I'm in college, I'm in high school, and I have a project and they have a girl who's my partner in this project. How do I deal with it? Obviously, if you don't have to have a member of the opposite gender to work with, it's best, because it's better to keep away. As we say in English, that prevention is better than cure. So if you can keep away, and if you can have interactions and you have a chance to choose somebody, have somebody of the same gender. But if you can't, ensure that it is at a respectable level. Ensure that you don't cross boundaries. Ensure that you don't allow yourself to fall into the pitfall of going past what is the permissible. Because as the hadith tell us that any time a man and a woman are together, two people who are not, related to one another, the third person is Satan, is Iblis. And he will definitely try to influence both of those individuals to go towards the impermissible. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, on this 9th night of the month of Muharram, of the tragedy of Karbala, we focus on a young man whose shahadat is, or was, and is probably one of the most difficult for Abu Abdullah to face. Although Imam Hussein had to go through seeing all of his family and friends killed on the day of Ashura, to know what would happen after his own martyrdom. But when it comes to his son, Ali al-Akbar, definitely this struck a very difficult chord with Abu Abdullah Hussein alayhi salam. To know who Ali Akbar is to know how Abu Abdullah alayhi salam himself spoke about this young boy. On the day of Ashura, or even just there before, about when Abu Abdullah was explaining who Ali al-Akbar was to the community, he gave us a beautiful vision of who he was. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam would tell the community, he would say that whenever we love to look at the face of Rasulullah, because Rasulullah had passed away many years before Ashura, but Abu Abdullah would say that whenever we long to remember Rasulullah, that we would look to the face of Ali al-Akbar. Abu Abdullah alayhi salam would say that he was the most similar to Rasulullah. He would say, خَلْقًا وَخُلْقًا وَمَنْتَقًا بِجَدْبِ رَسُولِكَ, that when you looked at the face of Ali al-Akbar, he looked like Rasulullah. When you looked at the akhlaq, the morals, the way he carried himself, he was just like Rasulullah. When you listen to the way that Ali al-Akbar spoke, Abu Abdullah says he spoke just like Rasulullah. And so he says, whenever we wanted to remember the Messenger of Allah, we look to this young man. And this is that young man who we remember tonight that gave his blood on the day of Ashura, that gave his sacrifice for the cause of Islam and for the cause of his father and his master Abu Abdullah. We're told that on the day of Ashura, as all the enemy forces had come and they had gathered to fight against Abu Abdullah, that as the companions had gone, as the members of the family had gone to be killed, finally at one point when Imam Hussein let out that call, when he said, هَلْ مِنْ يَاسِرٍ يَنْصُرْنَا هَلْ مِنْ ذَابٍ يَذُوبُ عَنْ حَرَمِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ, that is there anybody to come and help us, Ahlul Bayt? Is there anybody here to give his support for us, the family of the Prophet? That Ali al-Akbar steps up and he says to his father, he says, oh father, I'm ready to give my life. Here it is where Abu Abdullah looks at his son and he remembers Rasulullah. Abu Abdullah, he doesn't want to give his son that permission, but he knows that he's answering the call of his master. He tells his son Ali al-Akbar that you have the permission to go. As Ali al-Akbar mounts upon the horse, as Ali Akbar goes towards the battlefield on the day of Ashura, the historians mention that he goes like a brave warrior into the battlefield. He begins to chop down the enemy one after the other after the other. The books of Makkah mention that at one point, Abu Abdullah is standing at the door of his tent. He's looking towards the battlefield of Karbala. He sees Layla, the mother of Ali al-Akbar, standing at the tent, and her eyes are fixated on Abu Abdullah. She narrates that when I looked at the face of Abu Abdullah, that his face was glowing. His face was full of light. It was full of this divine, resplendent light. And Abu Abdullah was looking at the battlefield on the day of Ashura. Layla mentions that his face was glowing, seeing how proud he was as a father, that his son was taking such a stand on this treacherous day of Ashura. She then mentions, however, that as Ali al-Akbar is in the battlefield, and as Imam Hussein has this happy look on his face, that he begins to change his complexion. He begins to become more worried and concerned. Layla asks Imam Hussein, she says, oh my husband, oh my master, what has happened in the battlefield? Has something happened to my son? Has something happened to Ali al-Akbar? And Imam Hussein says that no, he's okay. but one of the enemy forces that I fear will do damage has stepped into the battlefield. At this point, Layla says to Abu Abdullah, she says, oh my dear husband, what can I do? Is there anything that I can do as a mother for my son? At this point, Abu Abdullah tells his wife, he says, oh Layla, he says, indeed I've heard my grandfather Rasulullah tell me that indeed the du'as of a mother for her son are accepted. At this point, Layla goes back into the tent. She raises her hands to Allah. She makes that dua to Allah. That she says, oh Allah, she says, Ilahi, bi-ghurbati Abu Abdullah, oh Allah, through the ghurba, through that loneliness of Abu Abdullah, she says, Ilahi, bi-atashi Abu Abdullah, oh Allah, by the right of the thirst of Abu Abdullah, she says, oh Allah, just as you returned Yusuf to Yaqub, just as Nabi Yaqub made dua for Nabi Yusuf, and you returned his Yusuf back to Yaqub, she says, Ya Allah, return my Ali, my son Ali back to me. We're told that not only a few minutes pass, only a few minutes pass after this mother's dua, that Ali al-Akbar is coming back towards the tents. He comes back to the khayma, he comes back to the tents of the family. And as he enters into the tent area, in what state is he in? The historian said he comes back in such a difficult state that Abu Abdullah looks at his son. Layla is looking at her son, they don't even recognize him. He's covered head to toe in the dust. He's so tired, he's so thirsty. He goes to his father, he says, oh my dear father. He says, oh my dear father, the thirst is killing me. He says, the thirst of this day of Ashura is killing me. Do you have any water that you can give me? Just a drink of water that will give me enough energy to bring these enemies to hell. Abu Abdullah tells his son Ali al-Akbar, he says, oh my dear son, he goes, I have no water. Look at my tongue, put your tongue on my tongue and see how dry it is. Historians say that Ali al-Akbar puts his tongue on the tongue of his father and they describe it as being like a dry piece of wood. Imam Hussein tells Ali al-Akbar, he says that go and fight, oh my dear son. Go for a few minutes to the battlefield. You will be killed shortly and Rasulullah, your grandfather, will quench your thirst. And once Rasulullah quenches your thirst, you will need no water after that. As Ali al-Akbar is preparing to go back to the battlefield, Abu Abdullah says that before you go back to the tent of your mother, say farewell to your mother, say farewell to the little girls, say farewell to the women of the camp. Ali al-Akbar makes his way into the tent. He begins to bid farewell to all the ladies of the family. Some of the ladies come and kiss Ali al-Akbar on the shoulder. Some of the young children come and kiss the hand of Ali al-Akbar. As they're kissing his hand, as they're kissing his shoulder, the tears are flowing from their eyes, knowing that this time that Ali al-Akbar goes, that he won't come back again. Brothers and sisters, as Ali al-Akbar leaves that tent for the last time, he bids farewell to his father. He mounts his horse. He goes back into the battlefield. As he goes back into the battlefield, again he launches a brave attack. The narrator of history, Hamid ibn Muslim, narrates that one of the enemies named Murrah, he comes and he says that may the sins of all the Arabs be upon me if I do not make the man of this father weep tears over his death. He begins to mount an attack. He goes towards Ali al-Akbar. Historians say that he takes a spear and he shoves it through the chest of Ali al-Akbar. He shoves the spear into the chest of this young brave man. As Ali al-Akbar is suffering from the pains of this spear within his chest, he loses focus, he loses his consciousness. The horse begins to go towards the enemy side. As the horse is beginning to go back and forth, the horse makes its way into the enemy ranks. Historians say that the enemy have their swords out. They begin to cut at Ali al-Akbar. They begin to take their swords and poke at Ali al-Akbar. They begin to hit him from all different directions. As the soul is leaving the body of Ali al-Akbar, he lets out one last greeting to his father. He says, oh my dear father, alaykum minni salam. My farewells to you, my dear father. Abu Abdullah in the camp, he's in the tents, he rushes out to the desert. He rushes to his son Ali al-Akbar. He sees Ali al-Akbar on the ground. He sees the spear in the chest of his young son. But what can Imam Hussein do in this difficult state? Eventually, as Ali al-Akbar, he takes his last breath and the soul leaves his body. The father takes the son. He drags him back to the tent. He brings his body into the tent. And I'll leave you with this one last word, that as the ladies are looking at the body of their young thorough warrior, as they're looking at the body of Ali al-Akbar, The one thing that the historians mention is that when his body was brought back, they describe it as being cut up, and they say, irban, that it was cut into pieces. The body of Ali al-Akbar was shed into pieces, and that this is how the women had to see, and the children had to see the body of the young Ali al-Akbar leaving this world in such a tragic way, that he was cut into small pieces, and that he had this, the last way that he left this world. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. We ask Allah on this night of Muharram, the 9th night, as we commemorate the shahadat of Ali al-Akbar alayhi salam, that Allah accept this act of worship from us, to forgive us any of our sins, to grant us the shafaat of Ali al-Akbar on the day of judgment, and to allow us to be within the camp of Imam al-Asr. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ. For the thawab, for the reward of all of the deceased from our families, our communities, our friends, the ulama, the shuhada who have given their lives for the sake of a religion and for the teachings of Ahlul Bayt. Surah Mubarakatul Fatiha. Before that one, loud salawat of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.